Hi there, my name is Dr. Debbie Quackenbush. I am in private practice here in Copenhagen and also practice with the Little White House, a multi-psychologist clinic. And I'm providing this video in a series of videos where I've done some psychoeducation about different therapy or psychology related topics that are relevant if you're an expat in Copenhagen. This one I created because recently I saw a discussion in a Facebook group about the use of an online therapy platform. I'm not going to specifically spell it out which one it was, but where a user had said, yeah, they got really great help from there, and I think that's fine, but I wanted to also talk about what these online therapy platforms, for example, Therapy Live, BetterHelp.com, there's several of them out there, but some of the pros and cons from a psychologist point of view. I'm going to try to make this brief because I know nobody wants to watch something like this in their spare time for very long. So let's advance the slides. Again, some examples are BetterHelp, TalkSpace, and there's actually quite a few that have sprung up. Some of them are international, like BetterHelp. Others are more local. Some cater to specific populations, like LGBT. So let's talk a little bit about how these came to be and some backgrounds about this kind of medicine or this kind of psychology, if I'm more specific. These platforms, what they basically are is they're analogous to providing an office billing and marketing for a therapist with very low overhead because there's no actual physical, or typically there's not a physical office space that the therapist practices out of. But platforms started opening up that did this online and using telepsychology, okay? Telepsychology has been around for quite a while. It's been somewhat controversial, though with COVID, things have definitely changed in terms of how much controversy it provokes. Telehealth, cyber psychology, is one part of a much larger rubric called telehealth. Telemedicine, you've heard of these kinds of things before. The very first video conference medical appointment took place a really long time ago. I think it was in 1947, 1957. They did a physical exam online. But since then, the field has taken off and, of course, has found its way into psychology. And people have been doing therapy interventions online for quite some time, though a lot of the tried and true, die-hard sort of psychoanalytic type therapists have been really against it. There's a lot of controversy I won't go into. Again, though, with COVID, I think COVID has caused many people to find an online platform and to stick with it. And people have found, maybe I don't prefer it, but it's also helpful. Telehealth is important. Telepsychology is important because it helps us to access people that wouldn't normally have access. For example, people in rural communities may have a hard time getting to a therapist office every week. So telepsychology is an awesome option for them. Also, people with certain kinds of disabilities may have a mobility or motility issue, have a hard time leaving the house. So accessibility is definitely one of the things that has driven telepsychology and telemedicine into sort of a more prominent position within mainstream psychology. The thing about these online platforms is they're particularly good for therapists who don't want to deal with the business aspect of things, don't want to deal with marketing. Frequently, they're people right out of school who don't have, they're not networked with other more senior psychologists to start their business. And again, like I said earlier, these platforms are very analogous to if I was to provide an office space to somebody here in town and was to take a percentage of their profits for doing that and the marketing and the billing and all those things. So it's analogous to that, but it's usually on an online platform. And again, COVID has really made BetterHelp and other platforms like it much, much more common and popular. So let's talk about pros of these platforms, and I don't want to sound like I'm completely denigrating them, because I find this type of medicine extremely hopeful. I've been a proponent of teletherapy for a very long time, and I've been a proponent of accessibility for a very long time, and trying to bring mental health to greater amounts of people. You know, there's just evidence that only about 20% of people who need therapy actually get therapy, and I think telepsychology is fantastic in that it makes it easy to get psychological services, and there's less barriers for somebody who might be ambivalent about it. You know, a major pro with a lot of these platforms is they are so sleek. I've tried a couple of them out. I've tried BetterHealth out, and I think Talk Therapy, I've tried that one out. And they're really user-friendly. They're really sleek. They have their own embedded video conferencing, email platform, the whole shebang. But they do more than that too. They have their own questionnaires, so they can look at, you know, what's this person coming in with? What do we need to treat them for? And they can, there's often a really large selection of therapists, particularly at something like BetterHelp, there's thousands of therapists. And so if you have a particular, you know, a little bit more rare kind of issue that you're complaining of, or that's troubling you, you probably can find somebody on there that can help you. And that's really different than going to just your own community. They also have these therapist matching services. I think those are really cool and sleek too. I'm not sure how well they work. I'm not aware of any data that has said that these have improved, this kind of matching has improved outcomes. I.e., if you fill out some questionnaires in the beginning that say, here's what the kind of therapist I want, somebody who challenges me, then they can match you with a therapist like that and hopefully give you the best therapy experience possible. And of course, I've already mentioned accessibility. But there are some cons as well. I have checked this out. You can also find a lot of therapist and psychologist threads, like on Reddit, that talk about working at some of these places. Again, I'm not gonna name any specific names here, but many of the platforms take little or no responsibility for the quality of therapists. This could even include whether they're licensed or not. A couple of them claim they only get licensed therapists, but given that, if you're international, I just want to give you an idea about the scope of licensing, is that all the laws are different from country to country, and even from state to state in the U.S. So in order to track on, does this person, are they licensed? It's very cumbersome. And the other thing about licensure, sometimes you have to keep it up. In a lot of states, you have to get a certain amount of CEUs, or continuing education credits. And so the platform has to also keep up with that, make sure you haven't had any ethical complaints. And they've been really criticized for not having the ability to accurately keep track of the therapists on their platform. I think this is a shame. And they even have a disclaimer on one of the major ones that says, we do not take responsibility for the quality of therapy. That's really different. For example, in the clinic that I'm in, we make sure people are educated. We make sure they're on a licensing track or licensed. It's much easier to do that small scale. So I mentioned they don't keep up with the licensing laws. They may say that they do, but in reality that may mean send me a piece of paper. But if you're licensed in Luxembourg, they don't maybe even necessarily know how to check that that's a real piece of paper. A lot of the psychologists on these platforms, they say that the platforms, they promise much more than they can deliver. For example, some of them say things like 24 hours access to a therapist. And it's just never possible to actually have that. No therapist. We all have to sleep and eat and breathe and shower and spend time with our families. So many of them promise much more than is realistic. Importantly, I think, is that many of these platforms also exploit the therapists. They take a pretty large percentage off the top. The therapists at one of the major ones in the United States make about $20 an hour. That is less than a fifth of what you could get in private practice. And so they take a really big chunk. And some people have compared these platforms to the Uber of psychotherapy. So a lot of disgruntled workers and people getting exploited. And finally, one protection you have when you go, like to me or to another person who has a license, is that if something happens that's untoward or that that you feel is unethical or unprofessional, you can call my licensing board and you can report me, or you can take action about it. And if you have a therapist, if you're in Denmark and you have a therapist who's practicing out of Georgia, U.S., that's going to be much harder for you to do, and particularly if the platform doesn't really track all the licensing. So I think that's important in terms of quality control, but I just want you to know that this is going to be very difficult. What I didn't write here that I'm just thinking of right now is that if you have any local issues and you want somebody to be aware, of, for example, I treat a lot of expats and they like that I've had an expat experience and I know what it's like to be, in my case, in Denmark as a foreigner. And you don't necessarily have that with some of the other online platforms. The conclusion is, in my opinion, I don't think these online platforms are where I want them to be. I think they're really promising for the future. A lot of laws have to change, though, in order, like licensing laws have to become more country by country rather than state by state, or to where it's more universal. But basically, I just wanted you to know the facts before you consider getting therapy from one of these platforms. And so I end with this phrase here, caveat emptor, or let the buyer beware. Hopefully you have some more education as you choose a therapist for yourself.